Hey everyone, so Joe Rogan made a pretty surprising announcement yesterday where he is saying that he's going to be moving his podcast exclusively to Spotify. So I'll let him kind of give his spiel here and then I'll come back and we'll talk about kind of some of the specifics about the move.
Hello, everybody. I have an announcement. The podcast is moving to Spotify. I signed a multi-year licensing agreement with Spotify that will start on September 1st. Starting on September 1st, the entire JRE library will be available on Spotify as well as all the other platforms. Then somewhere around the end of the year, it will become exclusive to Spotify, including the video version of the podcast. It will be the exact same show. I am not going to be an employee of Spotify. We're going to be working with the same crew doing the exact same show. The only difference will be it will now be available on the largest audio platform in the world. Nothing else will change. It will be free. It will be free to you. You just have to go to Spotify to get it. We're very excited to begin this new chapter of the JRE, and I hope you're there when we cross over.
All right, so my initial takeaway from this was I wasn't crazy about it. I wasn't, just because I discovered Joe Rogan on YouTube and I was like, oh, the idea that he won't be on YouTube anymore, that I was like, oh, that really sucks. But then, so something really important to keep in mind is, so Joe Rogan has two channels on YouTube. He has the Joe Rogan Experience, his like main channel where he posts like the full podcast, but he also has the JRE clips where they post like segments of the podcasts. And honestly, recently, like, that is mostly what I watch, just because I usually don't have the time to like listen to his entire podcast, and so you just see the clips and you see the ones you're interested in. And so the JRE clips will be remaining on YouTube, which is awesome. I really enjoy that. The only reason I wasn't crazy about it going to Spotify is like, one, I really like kind of watching it. I do enjoy like the look of it. Obviously, I'll listen to it a lot of the time, but I really like watching it, and I just I have Spotify, like I use Spotify all the time, but I just associate it more with music. I don't listen to podcasts generally on Spotify, so it'd just be kind of weird to get used to. But the fact that the clips are staying on YouTube, that's really good for me. You guys are probably wondering why is he making this move? That he seems pretty happy. So the licensing deal, Joe Rogan will be getting $100 million. That's a lot of money. It basically explains all of it, full stop. And so some of the kind of details that I think are really important is, so he is claiming that he will be keeping full creative control of the show. I really hope that that's true. I really hope that that's true. I mean, he says that it is. I feel like he would have enough leeway, like enough push, where he could probably do pretty much everything he wants. I don't know if like maybe they like, he says he's gonna have like Alex Jones on again or something, if they like kind of push him away from that, or if they're just really going to be completely hands off. I have a hard time thinking that he would sign on to something if they would have like a lot of hands on, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that they might have some sort of maybe be able to push him in one direction or another. I really hope that's not true. I hope he has complete creative control, but it is something I'm concerned about. And the other thing is that I was a little concerned about is the free setting, because I have Spotify Premium, so I'm not sure exactly how Spotify works if you don't have the premium, if you can like listen to podcasts. But Joe Rogan is saying that it will still be free to everyone, and so that makes me think that they have some sort of deal where like even if someone doesn't have Spotify Premium, they can like listen to all of his shows. So I do enjoy that. I feel like I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan, or at least I listened to a lot more of him when I was younger, probably like 18, 19. And I didn't like, I don't listen to him as much now, but he's always said that it's really important to him that the podcast stays free, and so I think that he wouldn't do a deal where like that wouldn't be true for everybody. And just one of the reasons that this is such a big deal to me is that Joe Rogan has actually been very influential in kind of shaping some of my political beliefs, and like that might not sound great like initially, just because Joe Rogan doesn't always, maybe not Joe Rogan specifically, but more of like his show and his like kind of willingness to have like conversations and everything, just like coming, just when I was younger I was like super into the UFC, and like I've been listening to his podcast literally since the first episode. I listened to his very first podcast and the second one because he just talked about UFC, and they were like really interesting, and then he eventually started having like comedians on, he'd have other people on, and then like just kind of grew from there. But kind of like I wasn't super political growing up at all, really. And so his podcast was like kind of the first introduction I ever had to like people talking about politics. And I'll never forget, he had like this guy on, and they were talking about the Iraq War and just like how terrible it was. And I really knew very little about the Iraq War other than that it had happened. And just hearing this guy, and like how like arguably like ISIS formed as a result of us going into Iraq and removing Saddam Hussein, like all of it, this guy was talking about this, and I'm like, this is crazy, why is nobody talking about this? And then like, you know, kind of like my introduction into like progressive foreign policy was basically through Joe Rogan's show. And then I also remember he had someone on one time that was talking about the how horrific Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bombs that were dropped on those two cities, how devastating and just how horrible those two things were. And I remember he had someone on and they were discussing it, and Joe Rogan was super against the atomic bomb and just how awful that was. We bombed two cities full of civilians, and just how horrific that is. And like, I mean, that was incredibly eye-opening for me. And I wish I remember who the guests were for both of those experiences, but I used to just listen to it and not really care who was on. And then obviously he's influenced me in the way of like drug legalization. And I don't agree with Joe Rogan on a lot of things. I think that a lot of times he'll like kind of simplify his politics, especially today. Now that I've like grown into like more of my own like political opinions, I do disagree with him on a variety of issues. And I think he kind of oversimplifies things, where he'll say stuff like, you know what we need to do, we just need to get the top 10 smartest people in the room and we just need to let them figure everything out. And it's just like, well, it doesn't really work. That doesn't really work like that. He's like, we gotta get Elon Musk, Neil deGrasse Tyson, probably Sam Harris. We gotta get all these smart people in the same room, and they'll just figure it out. And like, I don't think that's. I remember, you know, 17-year-old me. It's like, that's so brilliant, and then now I'm just like, oh gosh, just kind of cringing at that a little bit. But when it comes to like foreign policy and like the way that he talks about things regarding like humans and like people and like respecting people, I feel like is really has been really influential on me. Like, I remember after I think it was the leader of ISIS, the US killed the leader of ISIS, and I remember like, okay, he's the leader of ISIS and everything, but like the way that people talked about it, like they were talking about like how like happy they were that he was like in pain at the end, and how he was like I remember Trump like gave the briefing or whatever he was talking about, like, oh, he was crying and like, you know, begging for mercy, and it's just like, and that was like a joyous thing. And I was just so like kind of disgusted by that, you know, that we would take pleasure in another human's suffering, even if it was someone that was terrible, like the leader of ISIS. Like, the idea that you would take pleasure in that, I found like so just awful. But nowhere did I see anybody kind of saying that was a bad thing. Like, no one was saying that was bad, the way that people were talking about that, taking pleasure in the fact that this guy was crying and begging in his last moments. I find that just awful. And like, nobody was really talking about that. And then I remember listening to Joe Rogan a few days after it happened, and he was talking about how like disgusting that was that someone would say that. And I'm like, oh, you know, no matter what I disagree with him on in terms of like specific policy, I do know that he has the right idea when it comes to like people, and that people are people at the end of the day. You know, people aren't like, we have this, one of the most like insightful things I feel like he's ever said is that we have this like tendency to look at people as like a finished product, and we don't look at them as like, oh, you're just a baby that's like 30 years old. You know what I mean? We don't look at things like you are like, as someone like this leader of ISIS, that guy was a baby at one point, and that's like really sad what happened to him and what he became. And obviously he did some horrible things, but like, that's a tragedy. That's not like something that we should be like ever be like happy about, that's what happened and that's how it ended. And so that's, I mean, just in terms of that, Joe Rogan has definitely really shaped my opinions. And so and obviously I also find him hilarious. I think he's a funny guy. And I enjoy listening to his stuff even when he's not talking about politics. So anyway, this, you know, got a little deep there, but just Joe Rogan has had a very big effect on my politics. And so I want to share that with you guys. I wanted to, you know, let everyone know he is moving to Spotify. It will be like September 1st, I believe, is when he will be on Spotify, and then the end of the year is when he will be exclusively on Spotify. But that the JRE clips will still be on YouTube. Anyway, if you guys disagreed with anything I said in this video, please leave a comment down below. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.